I'll sit in the end. You can sit here. Two gentlemen in the middle. And then
yeah, good. We all set? Great. Let's begin. Yep.
I think we're
Well, this is I am happy that you're here because you are really the first, because you're going to have a bigger group next time. And so I hope you're going to have lots of good questions, as I know we have a very bright group here. We'll get a lot out of this. But I think what's really special about today is I'll start with Sonia Wedrychowicz, who is actually has an incredible story of moving from communist Poland to actually impacting the lives of 130 million people. I think that her story is quite incredible. I think that going down, you have a graduate from 2011, right? Who actually has had 4 startups, which included not-for-profits. He did Dancing for Children. He went off and started a school for orphans in Indonesia. He went from there to starting a solar energy company, which he sold, called Dragonfly. And then he created Hyperlink, which is transforming the way research is done and the way you and your lives can actually be impacted because you're going to have access to it. And then you have Solomon Cohen, who I will tell you from the first day he walked into school, and of course he's the youngest of the graduates because he's a class of 2016. He's now at University of Edinburgh. And what he does is he actually runs his own investment fund that's investing at present $80 million and about to invest up to $400 million additional funds. And but he was an entrepreneur from the moment he came in. And so, was always innovating, coming up with new ideas. So you have a remarkable opportunity to learn, really, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for joining us. So I turn it over to Megan Webb first.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, you guys. We're really excited about that. Thank you to our panelists. So the format's going to be similar to what we did before, where we're going to ask the panelists questions for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys and let you guys ask questions. So kind of think of things as we go through our conversation. But we love the size of the group right now because it's going to be a really intimate conversation, and we're excited to connect with you guys. So I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Jonathan Deaver, and John is volunteered. He's going to conduct the questions today. So John, thank you very much.
What grade, John?
11th grade.
11th grader, going to conduct this. Thank you.
So again, thank you all for coming. First question for you, Daniel. How did you end up in your current job?
On a plane. So actually, I was flying to take a week with my family, and I had invited a friend of mine who I'd met at Stanford. He was in the grad school. He was doing aerospace and aeronautics at Stanford. He was doing his PhD there. I did my undergrad there, and so we actually connected. Funny enough, in various ways, including board games, but including this plane ride. And while we were chatting on this plane, we'd actually been discussing some of the research he had been doing for quite some time, which was in the field of high performance computing. Him and our third co-founder Todd. We had been discussing that since from 2015 onwards, in the context of military applications, in the context of how do you do computing where you have limited bandwidth, or how do you do computing where you have very distributed systems. And so we thought, through the different complexities and the market forces, and then it was really on this plane ride where a lot of that crystallized. I joke it's a process, right, in which that occurred, but that was really, a formidable moment in the starting of Hypernet.
Sonia, the same question to you.
Okay, so my story is a little bit different because it goes back to where I was born. As mentioned, I was born in Poland. It was a communist country. When I was about 10 years old, I realized that my biggest dream is to travel. And at that time, that dream was completely unable to be accomplished because our passports were even held at the police. We could not travel at all. And I was lucky enough when I was 20 that the communists has finished and the Berlin Wall came down. And suddenly for the students of my university, the world has opened. And I got the opportunity to study in London, New York, and in Canada, in Ottawa. And then I started working in Citibank in Poland for 18 years. First on the corporate banking side, then on the consumer banking side. And then suddenly after 18 years, I got an offer to go to Asia. So I moved to Asia and I became a consumer bank in an Asian country. And you can imagine in a Muslim country, I was the only woman and a white person running a consumer bank. And I saw the people I've never seen really in my life, the Chinese, the Indian, and the Malay, were very different than me. That were my staff, and we were creating a bank together. And after the next 3 years, I moved to Singapore, where I changed completely, going from corporate bank into consumer, into Asia. I was asked to set up a digital-only bank that we have created for India and then Indonesia. And that bank, in less than 2 years, acquired 2.5 million customers and became the best digital bank in the world by Euromoney. So from that time on, I was always on the business side. People realized that they need people who understand business and technology. So I moved to technology. That brought me to JPMorgan Chase, that I'm currently at for the last 8 months, transforming one of the biggest banks in the world into a company like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Tesla at the same time. So this is a big thing. Changing the way we work, changing the organizational structure, and making us deliver the value to the customers much faster than we did in the past. So this is what brought me to that job today.
And you have 130 million?
120,000 people I'm transforming in order to deliver value to about 60 million customers that we have here in the US.
Solomon, in what ways do you encounter entrepreneurship in your workplace?
I mean, every day, it's about, look, in what I do, there are really two separate spheres. There's actually, your idea, and there's implementing your idea. You have to be creative from the start, from the get-go, in terms of forming an idea. But then every day you have to be creative in terms of how you implement or execute your strategy. There's no written rules in how to invest into something. There are really results at the end of the day. There are processes that you have to follow, and there are rigid structures, but at the end of the day, you own your own performance and you own what you do, and you have to have conviction in what you're doing and follow your ideas and really believe in yourself and what you're trying to do.
Thank you. And how did you become essentially prepared to be able to handle the current job you have now?
Well, I grew up in a business family where this was a lot of dinner table conversation and whatnot, so that was part of it. And actually, before I came to Dwight, I'd taken a gap year between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, where I worked at an investment bank in a very, very specialized, small, niche product. And I learned a lot about it. And in something that's a small market, if you're willing to do the work and you have people who are willing to mentor you, and you can find a mentor, then you got to believe that you can learn about it.
Thank you. Sonia, how do you encounter innovation in the workplace?
When I think about that, again, I will go back to my communist times. During I don't know whether anybody of you has lived or has heard what the life was like in the communist country. The shops were empty, okay? You could not find food, any other things, just very, very basic stuff. At the same time, when you were going to the houses of the people, everything was there. And nobody would ever ask, where did you buy it? Everybody would ask, how did you arrange that? That was the first innovation thing that I learned in my life. You can actually arrange for everything. If you've got this smartness in you and you can innovate and find ways of actually find yourself in a different situation. I think that first 20 years of my life has helped me to find a solution to every problem, because I was, like you talk about your family, yes, the conversations at the evening, at the dinner, I was brought up in a society that nothing was working in a normal way. Everything had to be invented. Okay, that helped me then when I was in Citibank. The banking system did not exist when we stopped the communists. We had to invent it anew. And I was in Citi. that we brought a lot of products from the US and the other markets, but we could not adapt them to Poland. We had to reinvent them in order to work in our country. So that was the beginning. And then all my life was always about coming to the situation when I didn't know about anything. Like I moved from corporate, I knew nothing about the consumer bank. I learned everything, I reinvented myself. I moved to Asia, I knew nothing about Malaysia, and I had to learn, and again with the people reinvent. Then Digibank, I never did digital things in my life, but using the common sense, my experience, the people, their energy and passion, you can always do things. And today, again, nobody has ever transformed such a big organization as the one that I work. And I remember my husband asked me when I was coming here, he's like, do you know how to do your job? And I said, no, I have no idea, but I will figure that out. So that's basically what it is.
And Daniel, this next one's for you. What was your personal journey to your current job, and what have you learned along the way?
Sure. So I spent 3 years here. I grew up partly on the East Coast. I lived in Indonesia for a little bit as well. I started to work on a project here at Dwight. Mr. Spahn made reference to it. It's called Dance for Orphans. It was essentially a way to raise money using something that I really enjoyed, which was dance, ballroom dance specifically. And we raised money specifically for orphan education back in Indonesia, where I lived for 5 years. And so after that project had concluded, I ended up moving out to Indonesia for a year to work on building a school for this orphanage. Actually, at the end of that, Mr. Spahn ended up coming out. I would say one of the things I learned in that process, which you'll hear throughout the story, is mentors are important. It's important to have at least one good mentor, but I recommend finding a number of mentors. And some you can ask formally. Others, it's just about approaching with a genuine interest to learn from them, because really you can bless both people when you genuinely want to learn from someone, because people in general like to help. And Mr. Spahn, for example, came out to Indonesia after we had built the school. And then from there, I ended up going to Stanford. I studied CS undergrad at Stanford. I spun out my first company, which was a solar power electronics company. The way that kind of evolved was also tied to Indonesia. Try to make this brief, but essentially I was excited about nonprofits, but I was more excited about this idea of how do you create a sustainable engine. Nonprofits are great, but businesses can be really interesting when they have good people running them, and when they take those profits to invest in a way that is really appropriate, considering the people, your customers and your employees and the environment around you. And so in Indonesia, we had this opportunity to actually look at how agriculture, 80% of the income from the people there was agriculture. How do you take agriculture and use that to actually increase the livelihood of these individuals? And I was interested in this space, but not just from the agriculture standpoint, but from actually a chemical engineering standpoint, because you could take one of these crops and distill it into ethanol. So I thought this was really cool. I said, okay, now you can arbitrage against this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific. You could take this tiny island and really maybe export this product, ethanol, to China or to other countries like the US. That could supercharge the livelihood of these people. But I was like, I don't know anything about chemical engineering, so I'm going to go to Stanford to study chemical engineering. And surely enough, in the first quarter, when we were looking at energy, biofuels, wind, solar, geothermal, turns out that solar is the most powerful energy source at the time in terms of growth. It was growing more quickly than any of the alternatives. It had a huge market share in California. So if you actually wanted to make an impact, solar would be the place to do it. So then I was like, okay, well, I really think biofuels are cool, but solar's kind of biofuel. You're still taking something from the sun. So okay, let's do solar. Not going to do material science. I'm going to do something like computer science or electrical engineering, which is even closer to commercialization. And then that's really how we started my first company, which was called Dragonfly Systems. It developed power electronics for utility scale solar systems. Then, to make the long story short, I was on that plane and met my co-founder and started Hypernet. So that's the story and some lessons learned.
Solomon, what does it take to start a company like Vellar Operations?
Actually, building on what Daniel was saying, it's a lot to do with timing. It's, the basis is expertise. You need to have expertise in something. You need to own your expertise. But more importantly than that, you can't get anything done if the timing isn't right. I happen to have an expertise in this very small niche product, which all of a sudden went from less than $1 billion in annual issuance volume, so in terms of the market size, to over 15 billion in the course of 3 years. And I sort of, got stuck sitting there along with 30 other people who were the only people in the world who knew what this 4-letter acronym SPAC actually meant. So, it's a lot of luck, it's a lot of time, you have to hit the right timing. If you want to roll out a new technology product, it's great that it's a great product. You have to make sure that the timing is right. You have to make sure why now. As you were saying with solar, solar had the highest growth. There was an opportunity there. So it's, a lot about what you do and owning an expertise in something, but there are also these external factors which at the end of the day, do have a very large impact on your ability to do something, on your ability to succeed.
Sonia, what is it like a day in the life in your department at JPMorgan?
If somebody is watching me from outside, everybody would probably say it's very boring because I'm coming at about 7:30, do my emails and stuff, cleaning up, and from about 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 p.m. I'm on video calls. Okay, I'm having a lot of meetings. My work is all about people. I have to engage different people all the time. Transformation is all about changing the mindset and making people believe that there is something for them in the changing of the way they work. And my role is to identify the different streams of work that we need to touch in order to make it easier for them. So I'm spending my time every day identifying what else needs to be done so that people are even more engaged and it's easier for them to change the way they work. So that's like one thing. And then I'm spending a lot of time with those people trying to make them believe and understand how easier the life and how much better the life is going to be when they change the way they work right now with a lot of coordination work, waiting and wasting their time, a lot of bureaucracy. When we move to agile ways of working, when people are sitting together as one team, working together, communicating all the time. And to tell you the truth, the biggest proof of convincing people that it works is to start small and proving in small little wins, and then people see this happening and then they want to be the same, so everybody wants to follow. So that's basically what I do. But like somebody's looking at me from outside at my little place where I'm sitting, it must look very boring, but it's very exciting because it's touching the emotions and the lives of so many different people, and especially me seeing them telling me that I'm a person who is a pathway to yes. This is how they described it the other day. It's like, we start with disagreement and then somehow during the meeting we are getting all to a yes and we are all comfortable with that. It's the biggest thing that is happening for me every day.
Thank you. And I know many of us are here and are interested in business and banking. So how would one attain a job in your department at JPMorgan?
Okay. So first of all, interestingly, I'm responsible for transformation of a large number of people. But my big belief is that I wouldn't like to have a big team and a big department doing that, because I'm a big believer that the transformation cannot be managed and happen outside of the business where it's going to be there, but it should happen inside. So my department is very small. I've got just a few people who are actually working with the people who are going through the transformation to make it happen. So I have a lot of champions that are sitting in the business, and I've got a few people working with me that are actually working with them to make it happen, making them engaged, passionate, and energetic every day. So in order to work for my department, you need to have a lot of experience. Yes, because people who are working with me are usually having this 20, 25 years of experience of understanding the business really well. So when they are talking with the people in the business, they cannot be surprised by certain things that are not actually true, but they can just derail us from the way that we are going. So I'm getting people who had experience in consumer bank, project management, technology, and others, and they are looking at different things in the different streams so that they can actually gain the biggest effect.
Solomon, what advice would you give to a Dwight student who wishes to start his own company?
I think you have to, the first thing is really, looking at what you want to do. When you start your own company, there's a lot of pressure involved because, as I was saying, you own your performance. whether it's a company that, bakes cupcakes, or whether it's an investment fund or a bank or a technology startup, at the end of the day, success or failure is your responsibility. So you have to be, prepared, both in terms of your experience and in terms of, building relationships and working with other people's. I mean, teamwork is, fundamentally the most important thing in working in a business or running a business. Because at the end of the day, no matter how hard you work, there are so many different aspects of a business that you need to be able to work with other people. You need to be able to trust other people. Working as a team, trusting other people, whether you're working for them or they're working for you, is the key element to it. I mean, my business is investments, so what that means at the end of the day is trading. Yet trading and investment research only takes up about 1/3 of my time. I also have to work with people on the client side, on marketing, administration, and so you really have to be able to work with people, and you have to own an expertise in whatever you're doing, no matter what that is. And most importantly, you have to love what you do, because there are great days in a business, and there are also very, very bad days in a business, in any business. And if you don't love what you do and you don't love the people you work with, I think you're not as motivated as you need to be to do something.
Thank you. Daniel, this one's for you. What's the most important non-school lesson you've learned throughout your process and journey?
Just one.
No, as many as you want.
Yeah, maybe I'll launch off what Saul was saying. This idea of persevering, it's very important to have a quality of perseverance. In school, it's interesting because you have a routine that's built. You wake up, you get to school at the same time, and then you go to your classes, and then you can go home and you can do your schoolwork. And then the next day, if you did your schoolwork or if you didn't do your schoolwork, hopefully you do your schoolwork. But even if you didn't, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? But in the kind of business context, getting on a schedule of actually hitting your own deadlines, it becomes really important. So, not like getting your schoolwork done on time in school is actually the easiest context in which you could do something that's going to really help you, because the grit that you need to withstand emotional pressures and other difficulties that exist in the workplace are so much greater. That's where you want to be spending your time. So get the getting stuff on time done right now, and then think about how can you build up resilience, and think about this kind of. I listened to one person talk once, and I don't know, for some reason it really stood out to me, but the idea that, I think the original quote is from Thomas Edison, the idea that, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, right? This idea that you really want to work hard in order to accomplish. And then the other thing, and I'll again just launch off what Saul was saying, team. Team is super important, who you're working with. The people that I work with are critical to the success of the organization. Everybody plays a key function. So finding those right teammates. Not everybody can be your teammate, but finding the right teammates. And then once you do find them, being there for them and working with them well, and making sure that not only the talents of yours and theirs are kind of amplified, but also that you are good people, that you think about each other with respect and dignity, and then you think about your customers with that same respect and dignity.
And Solomon, what is your biggest advice to us as Dwight students who are going into the workforce in the 21st century?
I think that there's a lot of change happening in the workplace at any level. Part of that's technology, but there are also, lots of other elements. There's the social element. How do coworkers interact? And I think, at the end of the day, the best advice I'd ever been given was to shake every hand you can, because at the end of the day, business, like anything else, is a matter of personal relationships, not about the relationships you have, but the relationships you will build. And that's really the foundation of what, look, the thing that enables people to do business, enter into transactions, for me to buy cereal at the supermarket and for you to, buy whatever you buy at the supermarket or at Starbucks is trust. When you go to Starbucks and you order a coffee, you trust fundamentally that Starbucks is serving you coffee. And so it's all about personal relationships, and it's all about trusting people. And you want to shake every hand you can, because you never know when that person might be helpful to you, or you can be helpful to that person. And I would even add to that, help everybody you can help. Because ultimately, over the long term, I believe that that's something that'll pay off on the personal level, and that's something that'll pay off on the business level.
And Sonia, the same question to you.
I would agree with everything that Salomon has said, and I would just add to that authenticity and integrity. Yes, that is such a big, important part of what you just said. Is always be yourself and always be the best of yourself for everyone. Never lie. I was joking even when I was talking to the kids that the practical reason of not lying is you don't need to remember what you said to everybody, because it's always the same thing. Yes. But of course there are more important reasons not to do that. I have seen hundreds of followers, and it's amazing because I changed between Europe, Asia, and now I'm in the United States. You wouldn't believe, every day I have my people coming back to me and saying, Sonia, when there's going to be an opportunity to work with you. And people ask me, what have you done in order that you have so many people that want to come back and work with you? And I'm thinking to myself, I've done nothing. I've just always been myself. I always treated them with dignity and respect. I always trusted them, and I always wanted them to be at their best. And then where they were failing, they always knew that they have my back. So it always was their success and my fault. And I think if you have this one thing in your life, having people, managing people, that you will always give the success to your people, and you will always take the fault on you, there's no way you will always succeed. So that would be my stand.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have for now. We can open it up to any questions you all may have. Harry?
So for Solomon, you don't count your chickens until they hatch, but you seem to create a very successful company. Why do you find the need to continue in college?
It's actually a question I get asked quite a bit, and my answer is always the same: I do it for my mother. But no, actually beyond that, I'm doing a master's in economic history. I find it very interesting. It's stimulating, and I don't want to look back at my life 10 years or 5 years or 20 years from now and say I had the opportunity to do this and I didn't do it, because life only gets busier as you go on, and the pressures you experience are far greater in professional life than they are in in academic life, especially in high school. They get a little harder in college, but still it's very manageable. And at the end of the day, I think this is something I want to do, and it's that's why I'm staying in school, because it's a good thing to do.
I'd like to make a comment. The first time he came into school, Solomon sat in the reception room, and he was reading Caesar's Wars in Latin, and his father was reading a series in Greek. So to give you a little additional background.
It is I've got the little geeky side to me, if you will. But yeah, ultimately, this is an opportunity in your life over the next 5 years, really, or till you're like 25. There are things that you have time to do, that you can afford to do, that you won't be able to do later in life. So you should take advantage of those opportunities. That's really why I stay in school, because I like it and I want to finish it while I can.
Marcello?
Yeah. Hi. Again, thanks for coming. It's been great so far. And I'm wondering, because it seems like all three of you have this, and this question is for whoever wants to answer it, really. You have this really interesting balance of really persevering and staying true to your original intent and your core self, but also really being very flexible and malleable in many other aspects. So in business, like how, and in whatever you do, because you guys have similar sort of end result, which is very successful in your chosen area, but very different areas and very different ways you got there. So in what ways do you think it's important to stay true to yourself, and in what others is it really important to really be able to change? That's
I can take that. We had a very interesting discussion recently that can relate to that, and the discussion was about the limits of compromise. Okay, and I think that's very much answering your question, is that what is always important is to stick to your core values and never compromise on them. And I have been in an organization where I felt that I cannot really continue without compromising my values, and then I was just leaving. There was no way I could compromise on those things that were important to me. At the same time, you also need to understand that not always every goal you can achieve in a straight way, like from here to there's only one way. Sometimes, without compromising on your core values, there is a way of going into smaller steps in order to understand where people are coming from, and through smaller ways of adjusting, you actually go to the end place without compromising your values. So that's the delicate balance between the flexibility and staying truthful to yourself. It's very important that you always know the boundaries that you can never, pass, and you need always to be within that limit.
so early on define what's really important to you that you wouldn't shift on.
I think so, and it's coming from your home, from your parents, and from how you were brought up. And I think, it's like I'm looking at my children and the way they're behaving and the way they're talking to me. Like I never taught them; they're just observing how we behave, and they know. But over time, the experience will define those a little bit more sharper, I would say.
Thanks.
I don't know what you think. It's an interesting question, so maybe you can also comment.
I thought your answer was great.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about your core values, it's really important. And depending on the work you do, I think there are different ways those core values play. In my own business, what I would call core values are my mandate, my fund's mandate, what we're supposed to do. What did we tell investors that we would do? And how do we make sure that we never deviate in the slightest way from that? And so it's all about self-discipline, I think, really sticking to those core values in keeping your moral compass to a certain extent.
Yeah, never think about shortcuts that will bring you there much faster, but you would need to compromise on certain things that you should not. I think that's the other thing that I would add.
Thank you. Yes.
This question is a bit related to Marcello's. So earlier, Solomon, you mentioned that you waited some years for your chance, and also you stick to your passion. So what if in one area that you're really interested in, but it may not have a big market in the future, versus the other area that you are less interested, but potentially has a great market in the future. What do you suggest to take on? Which path would you go?
Well, look, I mean, you can't, life is short. So you can't spend, a long time waiting for something. I didn't really wait for something as much as something hit me in the face, so to speak. And that's really what it's about. I think you do have to follow your passions. You do have to believe in your own projects and ideas. But one of the most important skills as an entrepreneur, I think, is learning when to accept failure. And if you're trying something, and the external factors, as I would say, don't allow you to move forward in something, you have to be able to move on. That said, it doesn't mean that you can't come back to it later. In finance, for example, some of the most successful professionals are those who are able to go along with market cycles. When the energy industry is going up, they're in energy. When the insurance industry is going up, they're in insurance. And then there's some people who, spend their entire life riding the market cycles. And every market ultimately has a cycle. So it's all about, as I was saying, timing. If the timing's not there, you just have to sort of accept that. But, always bear in mind that there's nothing stopping you from coming back to it if the opportunity comes back.
Daniel, I did have a question for you. Earlier you mentioned mentors and mentorship. As us all moving on in our lives and going to college and such, what would you recommend for us who are looking for people in our lives who are able to guide us and help us with our steps forward?
Yeah. So one easy way to find a mentor is to do what you guys are doing right now, is to come to events and go and find places where people are speaking who you want to connect with. One of the great mentors that I had, is, in addition to Mr. Spahn, is a gentleman named David Gregory, who, I, for example, I didn't have to go anywhere in particular to find him, except for Stanford. The idea is that he was the father of a classmate of mine, and he was I'd come out to California, I had nowhere to go for Thanksgiving, and they had invited me to their home for Thanksgiving. And I found his story to be incredible. He at the age of 24, had started a company called Synopsys, which in the true heart of Silicon Valley was the company that was designing the chips for Intel and really all of these other chip manufacturers. He ended up building that company over 10 years, and it IPO'd for a couple $1 billion. And this guy is very genuine with his time, someone who will sit down with you over coffee. I would say the mentorship role is one in which you need to seek out that individual. So once you identify that this person is someone who you're inspired by, you like their story, you like the way that they communicate, I would go and approach them. I would go and make sure that you try to set up time with them, maybe once a month or every quarter. So the pressure is going to be on your side, and especially when they don't respond to you, don't take that as a signal that they're not interested. It's just maybe that they're very busy. And so if you need to send them 2, 3, 4, 5 emails, that's actually great. You're getting not only mentorship, but also training in how to do sales, because at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot of rejections and you're going to need to persevere. And just because someone doesn't respond to you right away, doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to pursue them. They might just have a really thick inbox.
Great, and with that, to be responsive to time, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate it. I invite you guys to stick around and seek out some more advice on your way out to 6th period. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
I would still not so
Wedrychowicz, who is an amazing background that you'll learn about, going all the way from, which you perhaps can't appreciate, from communist Poland to really being one of the leading digital thinkers in banking in the world, transforming banking. Second, you have Daniel Maren, who actually went through 4 different kinds of startups. I'll just mention them quickly. Dancing for Orphans, so he created, because he was a ballroom dancing champion, he wanted to raise money to start an orphanage in Indonesia. And then he went to Stanford and he started a company in solar energy called Dragonfly, which he may tell you about. And then he has now invented another company called Hypernet, which can bring you all the greatest data in the world right to all of you, so you have the same research as the most advanced laboratory or university in the world. It's quite extraordinary. And then you have really the youngest of the panelists, Solomon Cohen, who graduated in 2017, who is a multiple entrepreneur, but has a major investment fund. While he is doing a degree at the University of Edinburgh, he is commuting to the United States, and he is running an asset investment fund, which is going from $80 million to $400 million while he's studying full-time. So he's doing all of that. So again, I introduce you to our panelists, and I give you Mrs. Webb, who is going to kind of introduce our guest moderator.
Perfect. You guys, thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to host you guys and have a great panel lineup for you. So how it's going to work, we have a moderator that's going to ask questions for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to turn the floor over to you guys. So kind of pay attention, and as questions kind of arise in your mind, file them away, and the second half is devoted to you. So we have a real treat. Jonathan Deaver, who's an 11th grader, he's actually going to moderate for us. So I think with that, take it away, John.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you 3 for being willing to speak. So Daniel, the first question's for you. How did you end up in your current job?
Yeah, so I started this company called Hypernet in 2017, really, with 2 other guys. Both of them were at Stanford, but they were in the graduate department. They were doing aerospace and aeronautics PhDs, and their focus was all on high-performance computing. I had already sold my previous company, which was called Dragonfly Systems, and we had been discussing computing since about 2015, distributed computing since about 2015. And essentially we were looking at, with all the kind of infrastructure that's coming out around us, I mean, it's pretty incredible the amount of compute power we have, from your phones to your laptops to your desktops, to the large data centers that are being built by Amazon, Google, Microsoft. This computing power, the reason why it's so interesting is because innovation kind of follows computing power, right? The more you can compute, the more you can do. And computing power essentially has driven arithmetic to really low costs, right? And if you combine CS with economics, what you'll see is that when you make something really cheap, you make other things really valuable. And so by making computing cheaper, you've made arithmetic valuable to the extent that arithmetic is now allowing you to have music in your pockets through your phone rather than through CDs or analog equivalents. So when we talk about Hypernet and where I am today, it's really kind of this venture that is really seeking to make it easier for people to get access to computing power, whether those are people at research universities, whether those are people at corporations. Essentially, if you know Python, or if you know a simple programming language, which I do recommend people start to look into. Actually, just a sheer show of hands, do any of you know Python? Perfect. This is great. Love that. Probably 2 or 3 years ago would not have gotten that answer. This is great. No, thank you, Mr. Spahn, for bringing CS to the school. That's great news because you should continue to foster those skills, whether you're going into finance, whether you're going into arts, being able to leverage computers, it's you know, Steve Jobs says computers are the bicycle for your mind. They're going to supercharge what you do in pretty much any workspace. Even being knowledgeable about it, you don't need to do it for the rest of your life. You don't need to be a programmer. But being knowledgeable about it is really helpful. And so where I am today is really kind of this culmination of just being really excited about how do you get computing out there to the point where high schoolers, college students, and corporate individuals can really drag and drop their Python scripts or their R scripts to do data science at really large scales, or to do simulations at really large scales. Essentially, if you have a project that you want to do and you want to get access to a little bit more computing power, I'd love to chat with you about it because we make that happen.
Thank you. Sonia, the same question to you.
So I will tell you that currently I'm leading a team that is dealing with transformation of one of the biggest banks in the world, and my mandate is transform the way of working of about 120,000 people, and that's what I do right now. And just when I think back about my story, I wanted to start from the very early days of my life. I was born in not just in the communist country Poland, but in a little town that until recently, until Google Maps have emerged, was not even available on a map. Very small place. And my biggest dream when I was at around your age was to travel. And at that time, when I was born in a small little town in communist Poland, that dream was impossible to fulfill because we could not leave our country. Our passports were at the police, and we could not travel. My whole life was about transformation, and when I was about 20 years old, a big transformation has happened. The Berlin Wall came down, our country was liberated and suddenly opened up, and I was given the opportunity to study in the UK, in London, in New York, and then in Canada. For a girl coming from a small town of 20,000 people, suddenly being able to study and learn the world and then come back and start working for one of the biggest banks, Citibank in Poland, for 18 years, was like unbelievable thing to happen. So I started on the corporate banking side, working with companies. Then I started heading the consumer bank. I was responsible for about 1 million customers in our country, about 7,000 people that were reporting to me. And then after doing that for 18 years, I moved to Asia. I changed completely my life. I found myself in a Muslim country, being a Christian and a white woman, the only white person in the whole bank, leading a team of people who look completely different than me, the Chinese, the Malay, and Indian, were thinking differently, were of different religions, had different cuisine, in a different climate, in a different country and regulations. And I had to adjust and adapt and engage those people to make a successful consumer bank there. I spent 3 years there, and then I moved to Singapore, where I was asked to set up a digital-only bank, a bank that was launched in India and in Indonesia, that acquired 2.5 million customers in less than 2 years, in only digital way for a mobile application. And I knew nothing about digital before. I just had that experience of living in a communist country, getting liberated, going to different countries, adapting myself in the new environment, and having this thought that impossible is nothing, like everything is possible. So we did that bank, and then people realized that myself, being a person that is embedded in the business, I've always been in business, started leveraging technology, and people need in technology business people who understand technology. So this is how I came here, and now I am in technology, converting the whole bank to work like a technology company like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Tesla. So my biggest dream is that one day people will say that it was not true that banks will disappear because the technology companies will take over because JPMorgan will be leading that way.
Thank you. Solomon, this next one's for you. In what ways do you encounter entrepreneurship in your job?
Well, you encounter, the question is, what is entrepreneurship? And I would say it comes to, I grew up in France, so I'll give you the real translation. Entrepreneur means undertaker, and not in the sense of burying someone, but an undertaking something. And part of what that means, to me at least, is responsibility. Taking responsibility for your endeavors, owning your success, owning failure, taking responsibility for your actions, those of your teammates, and ultimately everything that happens is thanks to or because of you. And so entrepreneurship in that sense is really decision making, but it's decision making, where the decisions you make, you'll have to bear the consequences, positive or negative, of those decisions. And so whenever you make a decision in your job, that's when you're being an entrepreneur, because problems emerge. You have to constantly solve new problems. You have to constantly evolve. You have to constantly grow as a person. You have to be able to manage problems that you've never had to deal with before. Every day is a new problem or a new surprise, or whatever you may call it. And so, being an entrepreneur at the end of the day, when you're in business, emerges all the time. You have to be an entrepreneur because you have to make those decisions and you have to carry the weight of those decisions.
Thank you. And how did you become prepared to handle your current job?
Well, partially is I grew up in a business family, and so in finance specifically, and so I learned a lot about things from my parents and grandparents, and from a very young age, these were discussions at the dinner table. I started reading the Wall Street Journal when I was 12, and just because it interested me. But beyond that, I took a gap year between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, and worked at an investment bank as an intern there, and really, became sort of a sponge in the sense that learning everything I could learn, soaking up everything that I would be able to observe, and find a mentor when I'd worked at that bank. And that's ultimately how you become prepared, is by being interested in something and by developing an expertise because you want to learn about it.
Thank you. Sonia, how do you encounter innovation within the workplace?
So I will go back again to my early days when I was growing in the communist country. And for those that have not read or have not seen, the life in such a place was quite miserable when you're looking at it from outside, because the shops were empty, like there was barely any food or anything. Like if there was a shop with shoes, they would probably bring stuff there once a month, and the shoes were all of the same size. So what people were doing, they started being entrepreneurial by developing the barter concept of actually exchanging. So people would go buy 5 pairs of the same size, and then they would seek other neighbors to see who those fit. So in Poland, you were coming to the people's houses, and although the shops were empty, you could see everything on the table. People were living quite good lives, and people would never ask a question, where did you buy it? Like it is the normal thing when today you are asking. People will always ask you, how did you arrange that? How did you figure that out? So the scarcity of goods and the tough conditions have actually stimulated innovation and entrepreneurship. So very different, in a way, background, but bringing the same result. If you are in a very difficult situation, think about Robinson Crusoe in this deserted island. Everything that he had to develop and arrange for himself, and that was the ultimate innovation and entrepreneurship. That helped me in my whole career, because I went to London and the United States. I went to London first time. My father gave me £15 to go to England for 3 months to work there. I figured out when I reached from Heathrow into the London Central, that I already spent £5, and it was the first day, okay? I had £10 to survive for the next 3 months. Somehow I made it happen, and I brought back £700 with me, which at that time was a lot of money. So again, never giving up and understanding and being comfortable that you always figure that out and you will survive even in the most difficult circumstances. In Poland, when I started in Citibank, the banking system did not exist. We actually were setting it up ourselves. Being in Citi, we brought a lot of products from abroad, but we had to adjust them. Then going to Asia, I suddenly was in a completely different circumstances, but putting the people around me and engaging them brought amazing results. Digital bank, we knew nothing about how to set up a digital bank. Again, we figured it out with a team of people with whom we were cooperating very closely. And then coming here, I always joke that my husband was really very worried about me when he learned that I'm going to JPMorgan Chase, being in technology and transforming a huge bank. And he asked me a question, do you know how to do your new job, before I started? And I said, I have no idea, but I will figure that out. So that's how the innovation and the right mindset which you should always have at any point of your life, I think help you out.
Thank you. Daniel, what was your personal journey to the position you have now, and what have you sort of learned along the way?
So I was born here in the U.S., lived 5 years in Indonesia, then came back here, did 3 years at Dwight. While I was here, had the opportunity to start this project through the 10th grade kind of special projects, and the project was a Dance for Orphans that Mr. Spahn mentioned. It was a nonprofit effort to raise funds for orphan education back in Indonesia, kind of combining two things that I really believed in. One, dance. I enjoyed dance, ballroom dance in high school. I still do some swing dance for fun on the weekends. Then the other part of my joy was just kind of trying to figure out how to bring education to these kids who really didn't have much. And so after that, we raised the funds. Then I went over to Indonesia, took a gap year between Dwight and Stanford to build this school in conjunction with this orphanage. Had a really awesome local partner. Funny enough, he was a pilot for Singapore Airlines, so he would fly between Indonesia and New York. So, I mean, some things are just very coincidental. And the really interesting thing was that after being there, I got so fascinated by the good that could be done through nonprofits, but even more interested in the good that could be done through business. Because if you can take something like agriculture, which supports 80% of the livelihoods in the area, and you can figure out how to increase the value that these farmers are generating, essentially now they can afford to bring their kids to school, they can afford to buy things for their family. So I got really fascinated in that. I started to explore this crop called sorghum, which grew actually quite well in this area, but had just been actually due to political reasons driven out. And started to kind of uncover that sorghum has a really interesting distribution of carbohydrates between the starch in the stalk, in the plant grains, and also the stalk itself, which has this sugary juice. And so in fact, you could take some varieties of sorghum and squeeze the juice out of that stalk and ferment and distill that into bioethanol. And I thought that was super cool, because now you have this opportunity to bridge the economy of this tiny island of Indonesia with potentially this market which consumes bioethanol. And I didn't know much about bioethanol, but I said, okay, well, that's what I want to pursue. I'm going to become a chemical engineer. And so I went into Stanford doing chemical engineering, but very quickly, my first class, a guy named Professor James Swartz, we were looking at how do you transform the energy landscape of California. And in doing that, we evaluated on a merit basis bioethanol to nuclear to wind to solar to hydro. And it became very apparent that solar was in this really interesting position where the costs were reducing dramatically. Over 7 years, they reduced by 90%. And like I mentioned earlier, when costs reduce, you create opportunity. And in this kind of position, I said, well, biofuels are interesting, but their kind of conversion ratio isn't that great. Now that I've learned a little bit more about it, okay, let's go to solar, where you're still taking sunlight, turning it into energy. And so I spun out Stanford, a couple of steps in between, but I ultimately spun out a company because I said, well, I don't want to do material science. I want to do something a little bit more closer to the kind of commercialization angle, which was the world of CS and electrical engineering. So we spun out a power electronics company for utility scale solar. And then ultimately that was acquired by SunPower and then started Hypernet, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much. For Solomon, what does it take to start up a company like Vellar Operations?
Well, it's a question primarily, I think, of Vellar is an investment fund. And so, obviously you need two things, is you need capital and you need people to manage the capital. In order to raise capital, in order to be able to manage that capital, ultimately you need, the first thing is expertise. You need to build an expertise in something and build a strategy from there. You need to own that expertise over time. The strategy that Vellar runs today is a strategy that I had been thinking about since 2013, and which at the time wasn't possible, and because the market was too small. And ultimately, the market I operate in transformed itself from a market with less than $1 billion in issuance, so in the context of financial markets, tiny, into something that was a little bit more respectable that had over $15 million in issuance volume. And so in that sense, I was only able to start Vellar and to do this and implement my strategy and raise capital because the timing was right. The market had grown and investor sentiment in the market was positive. And so it's very important to always think about timing. If you have a great idea and you have a great strategy in terms of implementing it, then your main barrier to entry is timing. It has to be the right time to start something. People have to be interested in it, and people have to want to participate in this because ultimately any business depends on external factors and how people view your business and your ideas. And people are not always going to agree with you. And you may think you're right, they may think you're wrong, or vice versa. So you really have to catch the right wave. You have to catch the right timing.
Thank you. Sonia, what is it like a day in the life in your department at JPMorgan?
I always say that, if somebody is watching me from outside and I'm sitting in a small transparent cubicle, people would think it's very boring because I'm sitting at the same place for the whole day in front of a video monitor and just the faces change, okay? But when you come inside and you see the number of emotions that are there for the whole day, when I'm dealing with people from all around the world, from all around the country, and trying to engage them in the whole transformation process, trying to understand what their fears, emotions, expectations, problems are, and trying to solve them together with them so that we can make it happen. How do we understand what the other things that we need to make sure arrange so they can smoothen and facilitate the transformation and then engage other people to make it happen? It's actually a fascinating thing. I'm drawing a lot of energy by being with people, having the feeling of teamwork and working together. Sometimes, at my calls, I've got like 20, 25, 30 people. And you would never think, and I never thought that it's possible that having all those different faces on the monitor can stir such an amazing conversation, that people can actually, talk and argue in a positive way, bring ideas, brainstorm, and then something good is coming out of that. So coming out of work at about 5, and every day after those so many hours with the people on the board, I'm feeling so much energized because there is so much good things being produced during a day of work when I'm dealing with so many different people and trying to, as people say, find a path to yes. In many cases, when we start a conversation, everybody has a different view, everybody has a problem, an issue to resolve, but we usually finish the meetings with an agreement that this is the way we are going to progress, and everybody is comfortable with that.
And how would one attain a job in your department at JPMorgan?
So, my department is very small. I do not have a lot of people because I'm a big believer that when we are dealing with transformation, we need to make sure that the transformation is happening in those places in the business rather than in the transformation office. So I've got very few people who are facilitating and supporting the people that we've identified in the business that are champions, that are driving the transformation. So by definition, I've got a few people who are very much experienced with 20, 25 years of experience, either in communication, in training, in understanding the organizational, corporate, consumer bank, technology. So each of them is an expert in their own field, and they're dealing with different aspects of transformation, supporting the people in the field. So I am not, unfortunately, I did have times in my career when I had a lot of young people that are, and very fresh people who were supporting me and were doing amazing things. This time, this project is allowing a lot of experience and a lot of maturity to deal with very senior people on the other side.
Thank you. And Solomon, what advice would you give to a Dwight student who wishes to start his or her own company?
Look, I think you really have to, as I was saying, you really have to, first of all, to start any business, you have to decide what that business will do. And that really has to be something that, first of all, you're able to build an expertise in over time and own that expertise, as I was saying. It also has to be something that you're passionate about. And the reality is that, talk about being passionate about something, it's great, but in business, you really need that passion because businesses have really great days, but they also have really, really bad days. I mean, like, really, really bad days. And that passion is what'll keep you on course and will keep you motivated and drive through those ugly times and be able to reach those, happier times. So you really have to be passionate about what you do. You have to build an expertise about what you do. As I was saying, you have to get the timing right in terms of how you launch your business. And finally, ultimately, being in business is about having a team and working together with your team. You can't run a business alone. And as an entrepreneur, especially in a small business, and imagine you can probably speak better to this in terms of startups, you have to wear many different hats. You may be an expert in X, Y, or Z, that's great, but you also have to be expert in marketing. You also have to go out and focus on administrative stuff. There are certain elements of the business you're going to really enjoy, certain elements that need to get done that you won't enjoy as much. But at the end of the day, you have to love the people you work with. You have to invest in them and let them invest in you. And the most important thing is you have to be able to trust other people and build relationships with the people you work with.
Thank you very much. I think with 10 minutes left, we'd really like to hear from you guys and see what questions you have for our panelists. We really appreciate your responses. Thank you.
So any questions that you guys may have, feel free to ask. Yes?
Let's say you have like a passion or a drive or like an idea for a business. How do you find people to work with?
Well, it comes naturally to a certain extent. When I started my fund, I only had one person working with me, or someone I had worked with in the past. Now work with 3 other people, 2 of which I had worked with in the past. When I was when I was an intern, I actually worked with at the bank I had interned at, and the other is a person that I had interacted with on a daily basis when I started my business. And ultimately, we had a good relationship. We decided that, there are ways we could be useful to each other, and things went from there, and now we work together. When you're starting your business, though, any business is going to need capital to get off the ground, and having employees, that's a intense use of capital, and it's something you may not be able to afford initially. And that's really sometimes the most challenging part of being an entrepreneur, is because you have to wear all these different hats. If you start a clothing business tomorrow and you're a great fashion designer, you may not be so in tune with the digital marketing side of it. And you're going to have to figure that out until you can raise enough capital or you're making enough money so that you can hire someone and work with somebody who really is good in digital marketing. So it takes time, but it's very much an element of serendipity.
Yes, go ahead.
This is kind of for everyone, but I know because you're just out of high school. Not just, but I was thinking, so where you are now, did you see, did you have a specific plan? Did you know where you were going, or did you just take what you liked and kind of see where it landed you?
Well, I got stuck in a situation a little bit where there was this very, very small niche market, which I had learned a lot about when nobody, and I mean literally, less than 100 people in the entire world actually cared about. And all of a sudden, in 2017, it became a market that a lot of people cared about, and I was basically left as one of 30 or 35 people who really had some level of expertise in the product. And so I got very lucky in that sense, but it's all about taking advantage of that luck, taking advantage of the opportunity that has manifested itself. And it took me about 9 months to actually put together the legal documentation to form my fund. I had never spoken to a lawyer before I called up a law firm and said, hey, I'd like to start a hedge fund. Could you please explain how that works? And so it's really about learning, you learn as you go on.
So I'm just so curious, how did you develop this expertise in this particular niche market? What niche is it? What did you just stumble into that you happen to know a lot about?
Well, it's a market called the SPAC market, and there are special kinds of investment companies that are publicly listed and go out. They don't have any commercial operations, and they're only point of being in existence is to go out and buy another company. And there's a very standardized set of rules that govern these companies and how they work and what they can do, what they can't do. And so in a small enough market where there are only 70 companies at one time, if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to ask people questions and reach out to people and find a mentor, even if that means calling someone 12 times a week and not having them pick up the phone, that kind of market, I was able to learn enough about these companies that I literally knew the serial number. You could spit out a name, I would know the serial number of the federal registration company, of the federal registration of each company by heart. So it's really all about learning and going through that documentation. That's a much, much harder thing to do in something like computer science, I would say. But in what I do, it is something where you can really develop an expertise by learning. You go online. I went online to the SEC's website, and I went through every single filing, probably thousands and thousands of pages of every company, and sort of at the end of the day, that's how I learned about this stuff.
Daniel, I do have a question for you. You've had multiple ventures, and so how do you continue to work through the process sort of seemingly over and over again, and how do you find the determination to start a new company or work on sort of building a company from the ground up on multiple occasions?
So, well, your question was a very good one about finding people to work with. I would say I'm a big fan of co-founders. I think the idea of having a couple partners, just so happens that 3 has been a consistent number. The balance, because it's so difficult to start a company, as Saul mentioned, there are a lot of emotionally trying times. Having someone who you're going into that venture with who doesn't necessarily need to be a friend per se, although there are people who say it's good to start companies with friends and people who say it's bad, but someone who you can align with this kind of vision, that that you're going to be working towards this thing, this outcome, whatever that may be. You're going to believe in that outcome so much. You think it's so right that you're going to do this. You don't necessarily know every step it's going to take. A to B is maybe you'll take a step to the left or 3 steps to the right or many steps back. But the idea is that every time you hit something that's difficult, you are trying to achieve that outcome with your partners. And that drive to achieve that thing that you believe is important is going to allow you to keep going. And so I would say one is to get this idea that you're gonna have moments where you feel like this just isn't working. It's gonna feel really, really bad, right? It's going to feel really bad. Probably, starting a company if you feel like you've had really bad experiences, starting a company and working on a company full time is going to give you the worst experiences you've ever had. But that is like going into it with that in mind. It's like, oh wow, this is really tough. As long as you are still keeping kind of some level of pulse on the market, pulse on your colleagues, pulse on your customers, most importantly, right? The people who you're interacting with on a daily basis. Then, and you're continuing to get the feedback like, you know what, it doesn't seem like it's going in the right direction, but I'm going to continue to work, and like this direction does look good, or that direction does look good. Then you're going to continue to be able to iterate. And so I would say that, that emotional kind of grit is important. Being able to trust the people you work with, because most companies fail because of personal problems, right? And it can be a lot of personal problems at the end of the day. So many. And fortunately, like going into a project, you want to be with people who are good, so that the reason why you fail is not that, but it's for some other reason. The reality is that if you get the people thing right, maybe your company's going to look very different than you thought it was going to look. But you might still, at the end of the day, come out with like success in the context of, wow, I'm still able to have this engine with, whether it's 5 10, 100 people that is doing good, that is delighting the people who it's interacting with, whether that's internal or external. And that at the end of the day brings you also satisfaction to say like, wow, look at all the stuff that I went through. It was so tough, but look at where we are now, and you can just kind of hang out with your friends in the company and play ping pong or something. And be like, oh, okay, now tomorrow is going to have all sorts of terrible stuff, but it's okay because we're going to have great times as well. So that's, I guess, I don't know. That's it. I think the emotional thing. I'd like to stress the emotional thing because I think having that emotional grit is important. And in the world today, where instant gratification with Instagram and all this kind of stuff, I think having the emotional grit, really working on that is important because it's gonna feel bad at times.
It's really good advice. Wish we had more time, you guys. This is really great. But with that, we'd like to thank our panelists very much for your time and expertise. We really appreciate it. Thank you to John for a great job moderating. We really enjoyed our time. I encourage you, if you didn't get your question asked, to come up and introduce yourself and solicit some more advice. But thank you very much. We had a great spark lunch today. Thank you very much.